after 2 years in Russian prison, Catherine the Great, the Tsarina of Russia, dies. And her son, Tsar Paul, comes to Kosciuszko. See Tsar Paul here. Here's Kosciuszko. Here's Jean Lapierre, his black assistant, and tells Kosciuszko, I'm going to let you go. But you have to swear an oath that you're never going to attack Russia again. First, Kosciuszko hesitates and says, what about my 12,000 men that are in Siberia? And the Tsar says, all right, I'll let them go, but you have to promise that you're not going to attack me. Kosciuszko realizes that this is the only way he's going to get his men out of prison. So he agrees to this oath and signs a paper that he won't attack him. So the Tsar lets Kosciuszko out of prison. And they both realize that it's probably best if you don't go back to Poland. Kosciuszko agrees that he'll go to America, his second home. When the Tsar lets him out of prison, it's winter, and Kosciuszko has to go across Sweden in the wintertime, so he gives him this sable fur coat as a present. As Kosciuszko is traveling across Scandinavia in the winter wearing this fur coat, he's thinking about how much he hates this fur coat because it was given to him by his enemy, the Tsar of Russia. So he gets to America. First thing he does is he gives that fur coat to Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson loved this fur coat. This is the official portrait of Thomas Jefferson. When he was president of the United States, that's what he chose to pose in, the fur coat that Kosciuszko gave him, the Tsar of Russia. Now, you've all probably seen this painting. If not, I'm sure you've all seen the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. You've seen it on TV a million times. You can picture in your head this big bronze statue. Jefferson is portrayed in that big bronze statue wearing this fur coat. So Jefferson and Kosciuszko become very close friends. And Kosciuszko reminds him that, you know, I tried to free the white slaves of Europe, and by the way, he wants slaves. What's up with that? And you should free the slaves. That's what I was trying to do in Europe. That's what I'm all about. I'm about freedom for everybody. And by the way, why are you murdering Indians? The Native Americans were here first. So Chief Little Turtle here of the Miami Indians comes to visit Kosciuszko, and he says, we hear you're this righteous white man who stands up for everybody, so we have a present for you, this tomahawk. And as you see, on the other side of the tomahawk is a bowl from it's a tomahawk with a peace pipe on the other side. He gives this to Kosciuszko, and Kosciuszko looks at the chief and sees that the chief is squinting. He says, I have a present for you too, and he gives him his glasses. The chief puts the glasses on, he says, my God, you've given me new eyes. He says, I have another present for you. He takes 2 pistols, and he says, these pistols I've used to try to free my race. Now you use them to shoot dead the first person who comes and tries to subjugate you. In this room, which is a museum in Philadelphia today, if you're in Philadelphia, go see this museum. Kosciuszko and Jefferson spent hours and hours talking about slavery, about various political issues, and now it turns out that the Americans who owed Kosciuszko that $12,000 have set up a treasury so they can pay him. That $12,000 at 6% over the years has grown to $17,000. So Kosciuszko takes that $17,000 and gives it to Thomas Jefferson. And he says, I want you to take this money, and I want you to buy me slaves, and I want you to free them. He writes a last will and testament. This is Kosciuszko's handwriting. And he says here, I beg Mr. Jefferson that in case I should die without will or testament, he should buy out of my money so many Negroes and free them. And then he goes on in his will to say, make sure there's enough money left over to buy them land, farming tools, and cattle, so that they can make a living as free citizens in this new country of yours. And he signs it at the end here, Kosciuszko. Jefferson is terrified of this will because he relies on this free slave labor. And all of his neighbors are slave owners too, so he has to tell all of his slave owner friends that they're all a bunch of hypocrites. So Jefferson rewrites this and put it in legalese as if he's freeing his own slaves. And in that room, Jefferson and Kosciuszko talked about many issues. Another one of the issues was, this is the statue of Kosciuszko at West Point today. Kosciuszko tells Jefferson, I finished military academies at Warsaw and at Paris. We need a military academy here to train your officers so that they will protect republicanism, democracy, all these virtues that your country is supposed to be about. Jefferson goes on to sign the legislation creating the United States Military Academy at West Point, the fortress that Kosciuszko built during the American Revolution. Well, another thing that they're talking about constantly is America's relationship with France. France is very upset that the Americans are doing business with the British. They tell the Americans, we helped drive the British out, and now you're doing more business with them than with us. So this quasi-war breaks out between the United States and France after the American Revolution. And the French start capturing British and American ships and bringing them back to France and holding them for ransom. Just like you have these Somali pirates today taking these ships and dragging them to Somalia. That's what the French were doing. So this quasi-war breaks out, and maybe you've heard of this, the XYZ affair in history. This is where the French are asking for bribes to get these sailors back. So Jefferson tells Kosciuszko, the French like you a lot. They named you Citizen Kosciuszko during their revolution, along with Thomas Paine, Washington, and a couple of others. Why don't you go and see if you can negotiate the freedom of those sailors? So Kosciuszko sails back to France. He negotiates, helps negotiate the freedom of the sailors. And then he meets this man, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte was a young general who had been traveling around Europe, beat the Prussians, one of Kosciuszko's enemy in a battle, and then sails off to Egypt, where he slaughters and murders a bunch of Egyptians and steals their artifacts and takes it back to Paris, puts it in the museums. When he gets back to Paris, the first person he goes to see is Kosciuszko. And he says, I've always wanted to meet the hero of the North. And Kosciuszko looks at Napoleon and says, and I've always wanted to meet the conqueror of Europe. And they sit down and they talk. And Kosciuszko realizes that Napoleon's not a good guy. He doesn't care about democracy like I do. So Kosciuszko goes to the French revolutionaries and he says, be careful of that young man. He's going to spoil your plans. Sure enough, Kosciuszko was right. Because 3 weeks later, Napoleon Bonaparte stages a coup d'etat and eventually declares himself the Emperor of France. Now, there's much more that I would like to tell you about this book, but if I do, Borders is going to be very upset because they're trying to sell the book. So, I can't. But they told me this. They cut it off right there. Don't tell them too much. So I just have a couple of thoughts at the end that I want to tell you. Many years later, in his memoirs, Booker T. Washington wrote that he was traveling around Poland. Booker T. Washington, for those of you who don't know, was an African-American educator. And he arrives in Krakow, and the Poles tell him, well, as long as you're here, you might want to go see Kosciuszko's tomb in the basement of Abel Castle. And he wrote his memoirs that I'd heard of Kosciuszko, I knew what he did in the American Revolution. I did not know, however, what he had done for my own race. So when I went to see his tomb, I placed a rose on it in the name of my race. Now, 3 weeks ago, I met with the president of Poland in New York, and I gave him a copy of the book. And I realized that the next day, I was going to be having lunch with Barack Obama at the United Nations, so I gave another one and signed it for Barack Obama. And the president of Poland gave a copy of this book to Barack Obama. And I hope President Obama reads this book, and I hope all of you do as well. Thank you.